Welcome to this edition of The Art of Wellness. I'm Dr. Tasha Mansfield. We are so pleased to have with us today a guest who is not only a best-selling author, but a physician who broke through the barriers that divided psychiatry and spirituality. He was educated at Columbia University and received his medical degree from the Yale University of Medicine. He is best known for his book, Many Lives, Many Masters. I'm sure many of you have heard about that. He introduced in this book a revolutionary form of treatment, past life regression therapy. His latest book is Messages from the Masters, Tapping into the Power of Love. We're here at the Weiss Institute with Dr. Brian Weiss, and welcome, Dr. Weiss.
Hi, Tasha. Good to be back with you.
Oh, thank you so much for being with us. You know, I'm sure you've talked about this many times, but I think where we need to start, for the viewers that don't really know much about your work, I think most people do, what exactly is past life regression therapy, and how does that differ from conventional therapy? Because I know you have a very traditional background.
Yes, as you mentioned, Yale Medical School, and they don't teach past life regression therapy there.
I don't think so.
No.
Right.
But regression therapy is simply the art of going backwards in time. I put people into very relaxed states, hypnosis, but there's nothing mysterious about that. The audience should know that hypnosis is just focusing the concentration so that when you're just paying attention in a concentrated, relaxed way. For example, when we go to the movies and we're paying so much attention, we're absorbed in the movie, that we don't hear the people eating popcorn next to us. That's hypnosis. I use that relaxed form of concentration to take people back in time. Regression therapy is just going back in time. Wherever you wind up going, childhood, infancy, in utero experiences, and many people have those and remember those, or even what appear to be past lifetimes. I think that these are real because I've had so many cases now over the past 20 years, but you don't even have to believe in it, not the therapist or the patient, for it to work. But basically that's it, just going back in time.
But a common question I'm sure you're asked all the time is, how do you tell the difference between if you're really remembering a past life and you're just imagining something? How do people tell the difference, or does it matter?
Well, at one level, it doesn't matter if they get rid of symptoms, and that happens all the time, people getting rid of fears, phobias, and other symptoms. For example, if you remember drowning in ancient Egypt, you won't be able to prove whether that's memory or fantasy or metaphor. But if your fear of water, your fear of gagging or choking disappears in this life, then you've had a profound clinical benefit, whether the memory was real or metaphor or fantasy. But sometimes it's easier to tell. And rarely we've had people speaking foreign languages that they've never learned. This is called xenoglossy. For example, I had a woman from China, a surgeon, visiting here for the first time. She didn't speak any English. She was using a translator, professional, and she remembered a lifetime from the Northern California area about 120 years ago. It was pretty intense. She was having an argument with her husband, and she began to speak in very colorful English. Now the translator, being a professional, he didn't miss a beat. He just turns to me and he starts translating into Chinese. And so I had to go like this: stop, it's okay, I understand the English. And then I thought he would faint, because he knew better than anyone that she could not even say hello in English. So these examples of xenoglossy, that's not fantasy. That's something real. Or people knowing historical facts or details that they've never studied. So sometimes it's easier to tell when these things happen. Sometimes it's difficult to tell. You have to look at the level of emotion, of detail, of clinical symptoms clearing up, because that doesn't happen through imagination or fantasy. And sometimes it's hard to tell. And at the clinical level, it indeed may not matter.
So the principle is kind of the same with regular traditional psychotherapy. Sometimes if there's an early childhood trauma, sometimes bringing that to the surface actually eliminates the symptoms. So it's the same principle in a way, correct me if I'm wrong, but if you're remembering traumas in a past life and you bring that to consciousness, it also can eliminate the symptoms. Isn't it the same principle, basically?
You're absolutely right. And you're a therapist, so you know this. So
Yes.
immediately you grasp the core of it, is that this is the same thing, except the arena needs to be expanded. So instead of stopping at infancy, like in the Freudian sense, we go into in utero memories all the time and have this validated by parents or others who were there. People remember their births, remember what happened at one day old. In Messages from the Masters, a new book, the second chapter is about a very famous news anchor on a network news show here in the US who remembered a detailed memory from when she was one day old. It was very dramatic, but nobody had ever told her this. Her mother and father had never shared this with her. And when she checked it out with her mother, it was completely accurate, every single detail, even colors and things like that, fabrics and conversations, and she was one day old, or even into past lifetimes. So it's exactly right. We expand the arena, the therapeutic arena, to include in utero and past life memories, and then it's like very much like psychoanalysis.
I think we want to address also for our viewers, this concept is relatively new in this country, but certainly in other cultures, in Asia, in India, this is normal. This is nothing new. Reincarnation and the idea and belief about having past lives, that life is infinite, that there is no beginning and end, there's just life and lifetimes. This concept is an ancient concept. There's nothing new here. The only thing is new and revolutionary that you've done is to bring this into psychiatry and say there's an application here for people to actually help themselves by removing past life traumas. But certainly, again, I don't want to try to convert our viewers because people have their own beliefs. I happen to share that belief with you, and I do believe that that is the case. And everybody has to come to their own beliefs, certainly.
Yes, in their own time.
Yes, but I think when people hear you speak and they read your books and they see that there's person after person and anecdote after anecdote of things that cannot be explained. They just can't be explained away by coincidence or it's accidental. So, maybe you could share with us another case that might really illustrate that this is actually a real phenomenon.
Well, there are so many.
Mm-hmm.
As I mentioned, there are cases that kind of prove this clinically. That is, they don't prove it historically. Another one in that category is of a woman I was seeing from South America, and she had a severe claustrophobia, fear of small enclosed places. And when she remembered being entombed alive in an ancient Egyptian lifetime, when she was a servant and her master died, and the servants were buried with their masters because the Egyptians felt you could take it with you. Mm-hmm. It's not true, you can't, but
right.
They felt so.
Right.
And this caused the claustrophobia in the present life, so that when she remembered this, her symptom disappeared within a week. This she had had since she was a little girl. So this, again, profoundly healing. But there are many validational cases. I've had people read concentration camp numbers from their arms, people who are 30 and 35 years old now, 40 years old, read concentration camp numbers and find the person, because you can track that down, that they were in their past life. We've had people find their own graves.
Oh, incredible.
A very famous case now, and I've met with and worked with Jenny a little bit, is Jenny Cockell, a British woman. When I met her, she was 41 years old. And this was in the green room of the Phil Donahue television show. I was up there and Jenny was up on this to be on this show about past lives. And she was talking with her 85-year-old son and her 81-year-old daughter. I didn't get that confused. That's what it was happening. And the story is from the time Jenny was a little girl, she knew that she had a past life family in Ireland. She drew maps, pictures. She knew her name was Mary, that she had 8 children, and that her husband was irresponsible. She left young, she must have died. She left the children. She needed to find out what happened to her 8 children.
But she remembered a lot of these things on her own. Memories came back to her.
Not through hypnosis, exactly. And often this is true with children, or in déjà vus with adults and children. We do remember. So she was remembering on her own, not through hypnosis. And she drew a large white building with many windows, a church with an unusual facade, and things like that. Well, nobody investigated. They didn't have the belief system or the money in her family. She grew up, got married, had 2 children of her own, and she decided to explore because the memories were still haunting her. They were coming to her. She was dreaming about this too. Her 8 children, her life as Mary. She couldn't remember her last name. The town in Ireland, what happened to her children. So she goes to the library. She finds an atlas of maps, of Ireland, and she has the map that she drew when she was 5 years old. And now she's comparing this map with maps of towns in Ireland. She finds one that looks like it. So she goes there, has feelings of déjà vu, which is that sense of familiarity, as if you've been in a place before.
Mm-hmm.
But you could say, well, she's highly motivated, maybe it's that. But then she finds the church that she drew when she was a little girl, the one with the unusual facade, and she knows she's in the right place. With the help of the townspeople now, she finds the remains, the ruins of where she felt her house was. But she finds the family that lived there was called the Sutton family. The mother's name was Mary, just like she knew, Mary Sutton, who died in childbirth after complications from the birth of her 8th child. So she had 8 children, Jenny was right. She died in that large white building with many windows. That was the hospital in Dublin. Jenny was able to go find the very room that Mary Sutton died in and describe exactly what happened there. It was very much correlated with the medical records, hospital records. And she knew all of these details. Interestingly, 5 of the 8 children of Mary Sutton were still alive. Just as Jenny feared, the husband, their father, left when his wife died. They grew up in orphanages. Mm-hmm. The youngest ones did not even know they had siblings. And they were able to be reunited. Now, years and years. This is more than 50 years after the death of their mother. These children are reunited, and Jenny is telling them details of when they were babies and little children. And she's right. They're confirming everything.
Why do you think some people can remember? You know, they say in the esoteric literature that at birth the veil drops and we can't remember. Do you have any thoughts about that, about why those memories are blocked? Why can't we just remember all of our lives?
Well,
all of us.
I have thoughts about this.
Okay, good.
Thoughts about everything.
Oh, wonderful.
Because I think this is a big school here, this planet, this Earth, that we're here as a kind of field test. And we come back to see, did we really learn the lessons? In other words, are we non-violent, using one of the lessons that we have to learn here? Are we non-violent to ourselves, to our planet, to the inhabitants of this planet, to other people? Are we non-violent because that's what spiritual beings have as a quality, non-violence? Are we non-violent because we know this in our nature? Or is it just because we were punished in the 15th century and we remember that? And that's not good enough.
Well, maybe that's what's meant by the meek will inherit the earth,
right.
Perhaps.
The
is that we must evolve. You know, I think there's an evolutionary process going on. One is on the physical level, which Darwin talked about. Mm-hmm. So there's that physical evolutionary process, but I think there's also simultaneously a spiritual evolutionary process going on. And we must evolve to that. We must evolve to a humanity that's kind and compassionate, and we understand that we're all members of humanity and not separate from one another. Otherwise, we won't survive.
I agree completely. It's true. We have these 2 lines of evolution, the genetic and the spiritual, the soul, the evolution of the soul. And, of course, they merge in the body, but we have to develop as spiritual beings. That's our purpose here. And so when I say it's like a field test, that is, it's not an open book test. We come back to see, do we really learn our lessons? And that's why we forget. Because if we remembered everything, we would be just weighted down so much by thousands, perhaps, of lifetimes, or at least hundreds, so many details. And this way we see, did we really learn to be nonviolent, to be more loving, more compassionate, kinder, not prejudiced, not hateful? All of these lessons.
But basically those memories are on the hard drive, right?
Right, they're there. They're there.
Right.
And a lot of people can access them, whether it's through hypnosis or in dreams or déjà vu, or people who meditate frequently have past life memories. Body workers tell me that a small percentage of their clients have spontaneous past life memories. They might be working on a foot or an ankle or something, and it's a kind of, I guess, cellular memory that we remember everything.
Yes.
But most of it is blocked from our conscious awareness. Using these techniques, we can remember, however. About 2/3 of the people I work with can remember their past lifetimes.
You know, death and dying in this country is not approached in a very healthy way. And Bill Moyers recently did a PBS special. It was very beautiful, and he really tried to address that in this country we have got to approach this in a very different way. And particularly, no one should die alone. You know, nobody should die these horrible hospital deaths. But just think if we, in this country, again, a lot of other cultures do believe this, but if you had, God forbid, a catastrophic illness, a terminal illness, but you knew deep in your heart that you're just coming right back, probably with similar relationships, and coming back with the same people, you could just say, I'll see you soon. It would be a very different death experience for people with strong beliefs in this. Don't you think?
Oh, absolutely. We wouldn't grieve so much.
Yes.
Because we would know that we're going to be reunited, both on the other side and back here.
Yes.
And I think also the whole experience of death changes, because a lot of the work I do is now not about past lives or reincarnation. That's an important part for me. That was my avenue into the spiritual, but I realize there's so much more. So a lot in Messages from the Masters is about what happens when we die, about spiritual states, about how to get rid of fears and other negative emotions and qualities right now, so that we don't have to wait until we die. So really what I'm saying is that when we die, there's a whole scenario of events that happens, of floating above the body, an expansion of consciousness, often meeting a light or spiritual figure or relatives to help the transition, a life review. How did you do here? Were you close to your lesson plan?
It could be a great adventure if you would approach it like that.
It's like walking through a door into an expanded consciousness. A friend of mine, Raymond Moody, who wrote books about life after death and the near-death experience, he talks about death as going from television the way it was when it first came out in this country, 3 channels, off at 10 p.m.,
no color.
black and white, right, no color, to walking through the door, and now you're hit with television the way it is now. Hundreds and hundreds of channels, complete color, 24 hours.
Picture in picture.
Everything, yes.
Really multitasking.
Yeah, and that's the difference between our consciousness, which is very limited, black and white television, and after-death consciousness, which is not so limited, it's expanded, and you have this vividness, these colors, a much broader perspective. And if we knew that, if we knew what to expect, we would face death in a much less frightened manner. We'd be much more confident that we'd meet our loved ones again, and it would change the whole nature of death and dying.
Very, very important. But I have to go back to the title of your book, because again, for the viewers that are not familiar with your work, the title is Messages from the Masters, but who are the Masters, Brian?
That's a good question.
You really need to explain to our viewers exactly who you're referring to.
Sure. Well, it ties in, as you see, with Many Lives, Many Masters, because for me, this, and as you mentioned, this was a very tough change for me. I was very left-brained and skeptical and academic. So when Catherine, the very first patient who had these experiences, was having these past life memories and her symptoms were clearing up, I still had great difficulty accepting it. It was hard for me because this was not in my background. And about the 5th or 6th time she died, she floated above her body, finding this light, and told me there were 2 people there to see me, my father and my son, both of whom had died. I had a son who died at 23 days old. My father had died 2 years before Catherine was seeing me of a heart attack in New Jersey. She knew none of this. I don't even have diplomas in my office. As you know, one theory of psychotherapy is you don't tell your patient about yourself.
Oh, no self-disclosure.
Well, you want them to project feelings and thoughts and attitudes.
That's the psychoanalytic model.
That's how
right?
we were both trained, right?
Absolutely.
So that's
and I'm reformed as well.
Reformed psychoanalyst.
Definitely.
Me too.
Yes.
And that's how I was then. So she knew very little about me, and she started telling me private little details, secrets about the lives and deaths and medical conditions even of my father and my son. This was shocking to me because I knew intuitively and intellectually that she couldn't know this information. Nobody knew this information, only my wife and I, and she'd never met my wife.
So it must have shaken you to your foundation.
Yeah, that was a real shock. That
all your belief systems had to go right out the window.
I think the word is epiphany, like,
yes.
That's it.
Revelation, yes.
Revelation.
Definitely.
Whatever happens, the world shifts, and it's never the same again. And so this happened to me, and she was telling me all these details, and I asked her, where are you getting this information from? And she said, from people that were around her but not in bodies. She called them master spirits. higher levels of consciousness, whatever word you want to know.
Did you think she was psychotic?
Not at all. I knew she wasn't.
Okay.
I treated her for over a year and a half with conventional psychotherapy. She wouldn't take any medications. She had panic attacks, phobias, depression, because of a lifelong fear of gagging that cleared up when she remembered the drowning. Actually, that's the real story of Catherine's gagging. And when I used that as an example in the beginning, I was thinking of her. She drowned in an ancient lifetime in the Near East in a flood or tidal wave. Couldn't swallow pills because of this fear of gagging. That disappeared within a week after this memory came to her. But still, that wasn't enough for me. I had to get this information about my father and my son to really make that shift. And that was a beginning for me. Then I ran to the library, still being...
right. Go into research mode, right, as you're well-trained as a physician, right? Immediately as a question, go right into research mode.
That's what I did.
Yes.
And there wasn't that much there. This was about 1980, 81, because it's 20 years now since Catherine. People were afraid of their reputations, of their careers. What would their colleagues think? And so there were some things that were written there. Dr. Ian Stevenson, who had been studying many cases of children with past life memories, documenting them, validating them, and a few others, but not so much. Because
and I do know that when you first came out with your book and started talking about this, I know that you were very ostracized by your peers. You were at a large psychiatric hospital.
Yeah, Mount Sinai Medical Center.
Right.
Is,
so they were not very receptive to this, I understand.
No, it was difficult. It was different. And it turns out that in Kabbalah, Jewish mysticism, concepts of past lives have been around for many, many centuries.
Yes.
And in mystical Christianity, and of course in Buddhism and Hinduism, and in Islam, in the Sufi sect of Islam, beliefs in reincarnation.
Certainly nothing new.
No, actually quite ancient, and the majority of the world believes in this.
Yes.
And the statistics for the United States are getting higher and higher. In 1994, about 30% of Americans believed in past lives and reincarnation, according to USA Today, CNN Gallup survey. When I was down in Brazil, in Porto Alegre, Brazil, I was on a television show, they did a poll of people in the whole state of Rio Grande do Sul, hundreds and hundreds of people calling in, swamping the lines, asking the same question, do you believe in reincarnation, yes or no? And it was the opposite. 70% of people in Porto Alegre believe in reincarnation, and this is probably true for most of Brazil. 70% believe, 30% do not believe. It's the reverse of the U.S. And I think in the U.S. we're over 40% now, because that was 6 years ago. So what I'm finding out is that most of the world believes in this, and it's in the traditions of all the great religions. But of course, my approach has been from the clinical. That's what I'm coming from, the clinical. Right?
Now, you mentioned a few minutes ago that you're doing some new work, that you're not just doing the past life regression therapy, but you sort of moved on to some new things. So what are you doing now? What's the latest?
I'm studying consciousness and healers. Healing and consciousness, the energy that's involved with that. For example, I've been involved with the physics department studying healers that we bring over from China and measuring the energy that they emit and zapping test tube cultures and bacterial agar plates and patients. And I'm also studying mediums and psychics. How do they work? Where does that ability come from? How do you know that it's real, not real? Which are the real ones? Which are the not? Can we all do this? So I'm studying what Larry Dossey and others call non-local consciousness.
Right.
That is, that our consciousness is not limited to the physical brain, that we know so much of what's going on, intuition, psychic phenomena, parapsychology, mediums and psychics, along with past lives, and anything that touches on the metaphysical. Because I want to tie it all together and figure out in a spiritual philosophy, well, okay, so what does it all mean? How do we feel better now? How do we use this information? How do we use our own and encourage and train our own intuitional abilities? How do we get rid of fears? How do we use all of this knowledge and wisdom and skills that we have let erode because we haven't been practicing? How do we bring it back? How do we get into a better balance now between right brain and left brain, between intellect and intuition? Because I think we've become overbalanced. We've become too much with the intellect in the past 200 years.
You know, my word for God, my synonym for God is universal mind, because that's my concept personally. And if you think about clairvoyant experiences, psychic mediums, To me, it's not that complicated. People say, oh, it's not true. And again, there's so many anecdotal stories that they're just really unexplainable, and so many mysteries in the world that we can't even fathom. But to me, if you really believe that we have a soul, and that soul is a fragment of the whole, then it makes sense that there's one mind, there's one body, there's literally one thing. So communication, telepathically and mentally, between those individual units seems like common sense. I mean, I'm trained very scientifically, as you are, and so, it sounds like you have the same mental process, but I have to make sense of it in a very practical, scientific way for me to integrate those things into my belief systems. But I think, you know what? I think science and spirituality are the same thing, and that we just have not come far enough along to be able to really understand these things on a very intellectual level. But I think that science is going to prove the existence of the soul in the very near future.
Actually, what you're saying is already happening. It's true.
Really?
Yeah, you're right there.
I'm late.
Well, no, you're aware of it. You know it, but now we have to do the crossing the T's and dotting the I's. And the people that are doing this are the physicists. So physicists are showing us that there is this non-local consciousness. There's something called string theory. It gets complicated. I'm not going to explain it, but this is being studied in physics departments now. String theory, which is the latest and the hottest in physics, postulates that there are 10 or more dimensions, different energy levels beyond space and time and solidness, and that everything is one energy, all connected, but different vibrational frequencies of that energy. And we know that this is true. These are hard scientists, and they're proving it. So what you're saying is, not only is it true, but we're starting to accumulate the data to prove it. It is one thing. Now, whether you call it one mind or one energy, it doesn't matter. It's the same thing. The names don't matter, but that energy connects us all.
Well, even Einstein talked about a multidimensional universe.
Of course.
So many years ago. But it really wasn't followed up.
This is being followed up. String
so
theory,
wonderful,
dimensional.
so exciting.
Yes, and they found particles, of course, that move quicker than the speed of light, and they're moving backwards in time. This is now proved. It's not theory anymore.
So maybe time travel is in our future.
Well, could be, yeah. I do that. I call it regression therapy.
That's true, right. That's exactly right. Yeah, and do you also, through hypnosis, can someone also travel into the future?
Earth. That time does exist. And so I don't like to go into the future because of self-fulfilling prophecies. It may get distorted coming through the human mind as things do, and people may make bad decisions for them based on distortion or fantasy or whatever. So I don't like to do that too much, because it's like this chair that I'm sitting in talking with you. At one level, the level of physics, we know that this is atoms, molecules, intermolecular forces, and energy.
Yes.
But at another level, it's a chair, and I trust it to support my weight. Same thing is true with time. At one level, the spiritual doesn't exist. But here in this dimension, it does. And so we have to respect it, at least at this level. It exists here.
And we're here for a very specific reason, but life is so mysterious, and I would love to have all the answers to life's questions, but I don't think I'm ever going to get those in this lifetime. But we've got to wind up. Unfortunately, we're out of time. I could sit and talk to you for hours.
Thank you.
It's really wonderful.
Thank you, Tasha. Great to be with you, too.
Yeah,
it's really
thank you
fun.
so much for joining us for The Art of Wellness. This has been a wonderful conversation. Please read Dr. Weiss's book, Message from the Masters, and you can learn more about this. I'm Dr. Tasha Mansfield for The Art of Wellness, and be well.